Welcome to all of you. We are very happy to have you here at this event co-organized by the Benelux, Digital Luxembourg, the NL AI Coalition, and AI for Belgium. We are looking forward to exchanging best practices on AI and to discuss future collaboration opportunities at Benelux level. I am Julie Scherpenzeel, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm going to start off by quickly walking you through the program. In this first plenary session, we will have 3 keynotes, followed by a presentation by McKinsey and a Q&A. We will then have 2 breakout sessions in different rooms with a break in between. At 12:45, we will gather again in this plenary session for the wrap-up and for a final keynote by Cécile Huet. You can use the chat to submit questions during the sessions and to connect with each other during the break and right after the event. Please note that this event will be recorded. That being said, I'd like to introduce you to our first keynote speaker, Alain de Mercer, Secretary General of the Benelux Union. Alain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome all to this Benelux online event. We are amazed, actually, that the high number of participants demonstrates how important and timely the discussions are. Benelux as a living laboratory for AE. All 3 Benelux countries are in the top 10 of the EU Commission's 2020 Digital and Society Index. We are individually European and global forerunners. But in the Benelux, we still need to bundle this expertise. The strength of the Benelux cooperation is that each country might have a specific agenda, but that in working together, we can be stronger. First and foremost, by pulling together the knowledge and expertise of and in our 3 countries, so as to be of a real added value for the 3 countries. Benelux doesn't want to replace what is currently undertaken in the field of AE in the 3 countries. We can complement these measures through sharing and using best practices. By closely cooperating and collaborating together, we can target projects which have transnational aspects and thus tackle cross-border issues. And that is very important for the Benelux. In being such a platform to exchange best practices, to foster innovation, to support new developments, to develop new business models, we can give the political decision makers the tools to take appropriate action. Secondly, as our Prime Minister stated, to underline the ambition and potential of our 3 countries to be digital pioneers and to act as role model in advancing the digital single market within the European Union. In other words, that the Benelux is a keen promoter and an innovator of European digital integration. And not at least, let's keep in mind the well-being and the security of our citizens. In the form of popular digital services and products, AE is already starting to influence our daily lives. For example, by being digital assistants or autopiloting cars, or by fostering new types of jobs and business models. This is just the beginning and bears many opportunities, but as well pitfalls. On the one hand, we need to tackle existing and potential barriers to allow for better cross-border cooperation. On the other hand, we need to fight various cross-border boguses and fraudulent schemes so as to guarantee the same level playing fields for all. AE is not a single technology or a single field of research, but a collection of approaches. We cannot pick and choose among big data, robotics, machine learning, reasoning, or planning, but we can set priorities and while being holistic, What we want, what we hope for, is that the Benelux can become the Benelux Center of Excellence within a global European AE strategy. Thus, the layout of today, which I boldly call a public-private partnership to foster Benelux added value for the 3 countries. So, as in a way, my opening statement, or to open this meeting, I encourage you all with the sentence, let's share our Benelux intelligence. Do give us concrete recommendations and practical proposals so that we can build on them. And to illustrate it, I thought I could use a sentence of European Commission's President von der Leyen, which says, data and artificial intelligence are our digital future. They can also drive our recovery. And I think with that, everything is said. And thank you very much. And I hope we'll have a very fruitful meeting together.
Thank you for these inspiring welcome words, Alain. I would now like to give the floor to our second speaker, Mathieu Michel, the Belgian State Secretary for Digitalization. Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you today. I must say that's a little bit frustrating because of the distance between us. In fact, the friendship between our nations is strong. We have a common history of cooperation, and I'm really proud of our capacity to work together and to build bridges for us, but also for the entire Europe. I am convinced that together we are a driving force for a stronger, safer, and also a more human-oriented Europe. There are a lot of challenges in front of us for the coming years. We will have to rebuild what COVID-19 has destroyed. But I am an optimistic person. So in my opinion, we must be able to take advantage of any fall, any fail, any difficulties we are facing to challenge ourselves and to be able to reinforce ourselves to rebuild a better world. I believe in a world more innovative, more durable, more equal, a world where technology is a concept appreciated and accepted by everyone as a part of their happiness. Among those technologies, AI is probably a beating heart. It's changing the way we live in a huge amount of ways. AI is almost everywhere, and it is only a beginning. Last years, we have seen how technology and innovation moved so fast, maybe too fast for the ability of the governments to sometimes understand, but mostly regulate or manage the evolution of the laws connected to innovation. Privacy, responsibility, opacity, algorithm, personal data. In my opinion, innovation is not always as clear and transparent as it should be. But understanding and confidence will be a key challenge for us. It's a common goal for either the public sector and the private sector. It's really important because I'm convinced that a part of our future will be built thanks to innovation, and mostly for about 3 countries, thanks to artificial intelligence. Belgium is positioning itself on ecosystems aiming for global leadership. AI is one of the most important, which we have in mind, but also at work. We will soon adopt a national action plan on artificial intelligence. It's built with all the actors of the sectors, industries, universities, all the levels of governance, and it will be based on 3 axes: creating technological impact, guaranteeing social and economic assets, and also an ethical and safe framework. We want to create technological impact mostly on the data management. We want to make data more reliable, more responsible, more open. The objective is to unleash the research and the innovation for our ecosystems. It's also an important part of our strategy in the recovery plan. We want to ensure social and economic assets. It means that we need to build more skills, from basic to high and very high educated skills. We also have a plan, therefore. We must encourage and ensure AI framework in the private sector, and I specifically want to take advantage of the already stimulated sectors existing in Belgium, in health, logistics, or energy. The public sector must also develop its AI framework, interconnected with its ecosystem. It's also a big challenge for our country, which is so complicated in Belgium in its structure. AI can give, in fact, the illusion of simplicity. And that's already a good step forward to help our citizens and our industries to be more agile, but also to simplify their lives. And finally, we want to reinforce the confidence in innovation by building an ethical and safer framework. Confidence will be a key challenge. We, as government, will have a huge responsibility to build protection, governance, transparency, and visibility to the evolution we are facing. You know, that's a new page of our history that we are writing together. And I'm really proud to be part of it with each one of you. I'm convinced that the Benelux coalition can once again inspire the entire Europe in building a better place for everyone. This issue goes far beyond the framework of one country. It's an opportunity for the Benelux countries, but also for Europe. By working together in developing a Benelux vision about AI and its implication, we can reinforce ourselves in the heart of the European reality. During the coming year of 2021, I would appreciate us to work together and to share our point of view on a number of big actual European projects. To my point of view, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, or the Data Governance Act will be key regulations which will be the new foundation of the digitalization of our lives and will have a big impact on the development of artificial intelligence. I'm sure that we need to reach a critical size to be able to take a new lead in AI in a strong Europe. Together, we must build the common framework of trust in innovation that is essential to seize the opportunities of tomorrow. There is a lot to be done in the coming years. The responsibility that is yours is huge. After COVID-19, the world won't be the same, and it will have suffered a lot. We have no other choice than succeed in building new perspectives for a stronger, safer, and more inclusive economy to the advantage of all our citizens. And I'm sure that's what we will do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this great speech, Mr. Michel. Our next speaker is Jan Mollema, Director, Internal Markets at Benelux. Jan, please take it away.
Thank you, Julie. And maybe the host should also be introduced as being the ICT Woman of the Year in Belgium of last year, 2020, and helping us at least to, in between all the men on the calendar today, to take a first step in women in ICT in the Benelux. Maybe this should be a project to start with, trying to move forward on gender balance. Regional cooperation. Thank you for inspiring and motivating speeches of our Secretary General, and of course of the State Secretary, who as Belgian State Secretary has the presidency of the Benelux this year, and thereby sets priorities, and they have set AI as a priority of the Belgian presidency of 2021. Welcome again to Friends of Innovation, Friends of Technical Progress. Welcome in a digital Benelux house. Often we complain about not being physically together, but I think if there's any topic that could be discussed in this setting, it is AI. It is the new challenging digital world, the new digital world full of opportunities. And that is what we are trying to discuss with all of you today, with all you stakeholders present here today. And I immediately say also a big thank you to the AI coalitions of the 3 countries that have actually put together the speakers list today and the topics that are to be discussed. I was asked, next slide please, I was asked to give some feedback before we start on what is actually the Benelux. The Benelux, as a regional cooperation of countries, is an intergovernmental cooperation, but it also stands for quite a number of impressive figures. On just 2% of the total European landscape, we nevertheless are able to produce 8% of the total GDP of Europe. That's quite an accomplishment to start with. The State Secretary already mentioned, of course, in the field of energy, in the field of transport, but of course, having adapted to the new economy, a largely services-based economy, and that is, of course, an area where AI comes in. In the meantime, the 3 countries gather up for 1.3 trillion euros of GDP and host about 1.8 million SMEs, numbers which I just double-checked the latest from now. And of course, they regarding AI, a vivid startup culture in the capitals, in the second-tier cities that could, if they link up, enforce each other. Maybe also important to mention a very skilled and trained workforce that has proven to be extremely flexible and agile over the last year, adapting to new work circumstances. But of course, AI, we all heard it in the former speeches, is something that is not there in all educational trajects yet. Next slide, please. An intergovernmental organization, 3 countries, not only bordering, but working closely together, being the founding fathers of Europe, having a special status. What is our main mission? Why are 55 people working at a secretariat here in Brussels? What is our main mission? First of all, where borders are turning into barriers in doing trade and creating an internal market, we are there to try and solve that. That is what our daily work is about. Trying to create a region without borders. Secondly, we serve, having that situation, as a living lab for the European Union. The 3 countries represent 3 different countries, but have work as a nice litmus test for the rest of Europe in terms of languages, in terms even maybe of the cultural meetup between the south and the north of Europe. Next slide, please. What makes us special? The Benelux has a cutting edge, and if you forget everything I said in this meeting today, in this presentation, maybe you may remind the number 350. That's the article number in the EU treaties, in the EU functioning treaty, saying that the Benelux countries can move forward faster and can integrate further within the EU internal market, running ahead of Europe if that is needed to reach a better integrated internal market. That is a privileged position, a privilege that we are not using for each and every topic, but only when really needed and when really important. AI could be such a topic. That is what we hope to explore with you together today. Next slide, please. To try and find areas in which we could make this work and where we could make AI opportunities real life in a Benelux context. Just a few suggestions, definitely not all, because we have a long program with breakout sessions in which you will be guided. But the Benelux, of course, is a place where we share values, and where next to the best practices which are all present, the values do play a really important role in trying to create trust through dialogue. The Benelux House in a physical context, but the Benelux House today in a digital context is the place where you could create a basis, maybe also turning towards Europe with a common standpoint on the ethical parts. The Benelux is a regulatory sandbox. This is what the former slide was about. We have legal instruments within the Benelux context in which we can facilitate pilot projects, and this can help the Benelux Corporation, but also Benelux stakeholders, Benelux companies to work across borders where Europe is slowly but steadily trying to create the total regulatory setting. Scaling up in a Benelux context. I mentioned the numbers: 1.3 million GDP, 1.8 million SMEs that are all in a process to, in one way or another, adapt to AI. This is, of course, interesting to use, trying to create a critical mass for AI. And maybe not to forget, we hear later on today, the European Union closing off the day. There is, of course, a relaunch going on in Europe, funding being put ready to invest in a digital, in a climate-friendly Europe. What role can AI play in this? I hope we can discuss about this today. And then maybe finally to close off as a last suggestion, the Benelux as an inspiration to the EU. We have in the past shown that we were able to deal with borders in a very responsible but opening way. Schengen, everybody remembers that Schengen started in and around the Benelux countries. Let's see where we can, in let's say the context of making new laws and making new European regulations, prepare this in a Benelux setting. There is a working group on telecoms already existing. We can create place for instance regarding the Data Governance Act. I think we have a lot to share there. We already actually heard while preparing this day today. So that's in a nutshell of the possibilities. How can you use the Benelux, make it instrumental? It is a place where small ideas can grow into something big. Maybe today is the start of that. We are, next slide please, 3 countries, 3 coalitions here today, and I hope we work on one Benelux, getting this all into the right context. As a last example, I would like to also especially welcome Yuri Boterman from the Dutch Embassy, which I just learned that he is actually got as his main task to work on a Benelux AI hub in the years to come, together with the 3 embassies over the 3 countries. So it already shows that we are working on the same lines. I wish you all a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Definitely a lot of opportunities for collaboration. I would now like to give the floor to Jens Ries Andersen, partner at McKinsey, to present their new report on digital frontrunners. Remember that during the presentation and the panel discussion, you can submit questions for the Q&A in the chat. Jens, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for the invitation. I hope I am able to be heard down in the Benelux. I'm a partner here with McKinsey out of our Copenhagen office. I have led our research over the last couple of years amongst on the topics of AI around future of work and how that is transforming our societies. We released a report a few months back where we had, based on our global research on artificial intelligence, we had taken the question and the angle to look, how does that look for the Northern European countries? And specifically, I'll come a bit back to the scope of the work. But my intention here with the session today was to cover some of the insights from this research and hopefully give you all, as you go out on this very interesting day where you will discuss and debate the opportunities for AI in the Benelux, to provide you with some facts, some context to what is going on with AI in other countries that can ground the debate a bit. So during my presentation here over the next 20 minutes, I would like to cover 4 aspects. Firstly, put it a bit into context on what is happening at the global stage on AI in Europe, in Northern Europe, versus what is happening in the US, what is happening in China. Secondly, as part of the research, we have done quite some work to look into what is the economic potential, what does AI hold for potential for us as society, and play back some of those findings. Thirdly, we have looked quite into to try to understand where the Northern European countries stand globally and in a broader European scene. Today I'll try to zoom in a bit on what that research shows in terms of the Benelux, what are strongholds, where are areas of improvement potential. And then I will finish my presentation with sharing a couple of thoughts for what are the considerations we as Northern European nations should do on AI. But let me start with this illustration here. So if we start at 10,000 kilometers and look at what's happening at a global scale, and we look at Europe and we contrast it to the US and to Asia, particularly centered around China. So what we started out in the research is we observe that much of the development and the application and the implementation of AI is focused around a number of clusters around the world. They are large metropolitan areas with research environments, with a lot of capital that has driven the development on this. And as part of the work, we looked at 300 or so clusters around the world, and we scored them on 7 key drivers for what determines whether it sort of has a stronghold or importance in the global AI landscape. And this is everything from looking at research activity, it's looking at the talent base, it's looking at what's the financial conditions, what's the number of patents developed, etc., etc. And what came out of that work is it really tells the tale of around that the sort of the penetration, the development of AI is happening in 2 places. It's particularly around the US and it's in China. And as you see here from this illustration, which shows the top 25 out of these 300 global clusters, that 18 of the 25 are based out of US or North America. So it's the likes of the San Francisco Bay Area, New York, Boston, but also some of the Canadian clusters around Toronto and Montreal are very prominent and has led some of the development. On the other hand, you have Asia, particularly centered around China, that has had a different approach, a more centralistic approach versus the US model, which has been driven out of the large tech sector. And put into that context, we see, Europe is somehow trailing behind with fewer clusters. And when we also zoom in on the region, which was the focus of our research, which we call the DF9, and I'll come back to the exact definition of that, we see that the cities listed here on the right as part of this region, well, they don't even make it into the top 40. So I think it's a worthwhile fact point to have in as we discuss this today, that the competitive race, the global competitive race is really on, and there is massive investments being put behind this, especially centered around the US and China. But what we did is that we had a focus on 9 Northern European countries. We called them the DF9. We have previously done research on these countries in terms of the labor market or the future of work with automation and digital. And there are a number of characteristics that around these countries why we think that they are interesting to look at as a group. They're small open economies, well-educated populations, generally sort of tech savvy populations with high adoption levels. General population has great digital proficiency, high knowledge intensive work. And in general, the populations of these countries have a very positive attitude towards new technology and AI. And as a region, it also drives sort of a meaningful scale in terms of GDP and in terms of population size. And there are ways where it will be difficult for each of the countries stand alone to in any way compete with the scale benefits of US or China or some of the bigger European economies. And hence we think it's worthwhile also to explore how is it that we could collaborate with among these countries. That was a bit around the context for it. If I then turn to the economic opportunity and why we think it's a interesting point of view, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a economic perspective. So what we did as part of our research is that essentially we analyzed more than 600 use cases for what is the potential application of AI with a technology base that we know today. So we're not envisioning, 15 years down the road that some new advancements in the technology may arise, which holds then this enormous potential. And we actually only looked at what we know is feasible and has been developed today. It might not be in the market because there hasn't been scale or there hasn't been the consumer adoption of it or citizen adoption of it yet, but it is out there. And what this shows is when we look at it, that's the number of 1.2 percentage points here illustrated in the blue bar chart, is the average GDP uplift we could get here over the next decade for the Benelux on a yearly basis. And when we contrast that to earlier technology waves, albeit be it the first digital wave with early web technologies, or whether it was the first waves of robotics, we see that the AI holds a much greater potential, largely due to it's a general purpose technology that in essence can be leveraged and penetrated across all parts of the value chain of the private sector within the public sector, etc. So it holds a meaningful economic potential. We think it's important for these societies as we over the last decades have faced declines in productivity levels. We're facing a increasing aging population. We're facing challenges around the climate and ways that we need to also pay for the bill that has come after COVID. And if we translate these 1.2 percentage points on yearly uplift in GDP, well, then that amounts to around 16 billion euros annually for the Benelux. But it's not only the GDP number that it impacts. And what we try to do is, based on a new streams of research, which is also trying to look at what are measures of wealth or welfare for our societies, which is not directly captured in the GDP statistics. And we then tried to apply the learnings we had around these use cases and looked at other drivers of welfare. That can be on health-related effects, it can be on work-related effects. And we should take this bit, this analysis bit as more directional than zoom in exactly on each of the decimal numbers, but it shows the magnitude and some of the aspects of why we think there is potential beyond, because it can help drive, health-related effects from employing technology that becomes better at detecting diseases in advance, increasing longevity, increasing leisure. But there's also some downsides as a society we need to capture, both in terms of it can drive increase in consumption and inequality. It can drive larger share of transitions in the labor market because technology takes over work roles and people need to find new jobs, etc. But net, I think we view that there is a positive net welfare effect stemming from technology, being aware of that there are also things that we need to look out for. One of the things we also explored, which this illustration shows, is we portray a quite significant potential, which we think is is highly attractive for our nations. But that is a potential, and that requires investments to get us there. And what we found is that we estimate that in order to capture this potential, it also requires us as nations to step up on the annual AI investment levels. So what you see here on this chart is that it shows by how much did we lift investments in the previous technology waves, which was 4x in order to deliver those economic outcomes we saw as before. And then we asked, what would it require in order to capture these 1.2% GDP uplift? And that number is, we estimate 8x. So, story being here, if we want to capture the potential, then we not only need to sort of scale the investments like we've done historically, we actually need to do it significantly more. So it requires us to start backing both as a public sector, but also fueling the private sector investments in order to capture this. If you look at the potential, and this goes back to the point around it being a general purpose technology, we really see that it has applications across the sector. So here we have illustrated what's the gross output of sort of the high-level sectors of the Benelux economies, and hold that against what is the AI value potential. And there is essentially a big potential across all sectors of the economy. If I turn a bit to the next section, which is around where do we see the Benelux stand in a global context, and how prepared are the three countries for sort of being what we dub AI ready. And we looked when we think about a country's AI readiness, we think about it in terms of a number of dimensions, which is listed here on the left-hand side. And that goes to the quantity and quality of talent, it goes to the investment levels, it goes to the availability of data and the underlying infrastructure, it goes to research, it goes to innovation, etc. You get the gist of it. And then we scored across 30 or so metrics, roughly 30 countries globally, how they fare across these dimensions to try to get a overall proxy estimate for how AI ready are they when we correct for GDP and population size. And I think what comes out of the research is that there are a number of leading countries which fare well across most dimensions. US, mentioned, it's the likes of Singapore, but also some European countries like the UK, Finland, Germany. China, we have listed a bit on the right-hand side because in many aspects they are absolutely a leader. But when you correct for the size of the country, then actually they sort of scale back. But in many essence, they should be perceived as a leader on some of these metrics. And then there are also obviously many, I think, issues around how the centralistic model has been driven out of China, which doesn't is not a viable path for Europe. But when you score it on the hardcore metrics around research, around investments, around the number of people being educated, it's a different story. But then we see a second quartile and a third quartile of many of the smaller European countries, where in the second quartile, the Netherlands and Luxembourg comes out, many of the Scandinavian countries, and then in a bit behind on that, according to our research, Belgium comes in. If I try to show a little bit country, just one country example here for the sake of time today, is here we have the illustration of Netherlands and showing across the different dimensions I mentioned before that we score on, how is it that the Netherlands fare versus the DF9 region as a whole, where we see some of the measures that the Netherlands is performing better on than the average region. It goes to innovation, it can go to the policy environment, etc. But whereas investment and research levels is some of the areas where we find that there may be improvement opportunity. I'll just skip a bit ahead and select on a couple of these. So if I double click a bit on the investments, which when we run our analysis shows to be a big factor that both drives AI readiness, but also drives the clustering of what are some of the leading clusters in the world. We see this is one of the dimensions where the Benelux countries are coming behind many of what we would deem the peers when we adjust it for size on this measure. I think for another of the metrics I mentioned with improvement opportunity goes to the talent. And here we have looked at the availability of AI talent across the countries, both in terms of what's the number of STEM graduates, what's the relevant base of people with AI relevant skills, and how many people are hired within AI intensive subsectors of the economy. And this again is one of the areas where we see in order for, according to our research, for the Benelux countries to advance versus peer countries, this is another one of the areas where it's falling behind. Here for the last few minutes of my presentation, I'll try to tee up some of the considerations we see for actions. And what we have done here is, this is not at a city or at a country level, but we have looked and the scope of our research was very much the region of the DF9. The themes we think are applicable to the individual countries, but there are also areas for opportunity for collaboration. 2 data points before we go into the specific recommendation that is an important context for the DF9. I mean, firstly is that we see that the SMEs, as was also alluded to here in the previous presentations, constitute a quite big share of many of the DF9 economies. Why that is important is because when we look at, and we've done quite some primary research to understand what is the adoption level of businesses, private businesses, in terms of various AI technologies. And one of the things that stand out is that there's a quite big gap between the major leading global conglomerates that are competing on a global scale versus the small and medium enterprises. And in general, the Smes have a much lower AI adoption at this stage, both due to investment levels it requires, both due to the ability to attract the right kind of talent that can drive this kind of development. And hence, when we as a nation or as nations face an economic or industry structure with many small businesses, and we know that they have low adoption, that is something as a society we need to think about. So here for the last few seconds, I just want to highlight a bit some of the themes that come out. One of them is maybe just to select a few of them. Number 2 here around the collaboration to achieve the scale in investments in innovation. We really need to come together to focus investments to build up the scale. It's around how do we drive AI adoption at scale. I don't think we envision that we necessarily as part of this region need to develop all the new technology leaders. They have to a large extent already come out of the US or of China. But if we can, with what we observe, that we have populations that are very positive attitudes towards the technology, if we are like the previous technology waves, are some of the countries that can adopt the first then that can drive a competitive advantage. And then the last one I just want to highlight here before I finish is ensuring we have sufficient AI talent across the region, because that will be a key driver of us being able to drive investments and adoption at scale. But I'll pause here, and then I'm looking very much forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Jens, for these interesting insights. And I have the leads of the 3 AI coalitions here with me in the panel, Marloes Pomp, Max Gent, and Nathaniel Akkerman, and they have some questions for you. I would say ladies first. So Marloes, you can ask the first question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this excellent presentation. It's very clear to me. My name is Marloes Pomp. I'm responsible for the international strategy and collaborations of the Netherlands AI Coalition. And I have 2 questions, and the first one can be answered very quickly. Do you have plans to repeat this research regularly in order to monitor the trends and to see what the predictive power of the leading indicators are in relation to the national AI strategies and investments? And the second one is, you mentioned the importance of the AI adoption by SMEs. And yeah, have you come across good examples how to help SMEs during your study?
Very good point. So the first one quickly, I think the answer is maybe. We're part of work in McKinsey also around the Stanford University that is building this up more at a global scale. And there are other initiatives that are building some of these indices to track over time. So if someone else will continue to do the job, then we don't necessarily have a role. If it doesn't happen, then I think it might be a different question, because I think it is obviously an important one. Yeah, that was a little bit of a vague question. Or answer, sorry. It was a good question. On AI adoption, on the scale, I think we've seen interesting examples of it in various forms, but I don't think we've seen it sort of at a, what could I call it, at scale that we have really solved it, because I think there are some fundamental challenges around being able to attract the sheer amount of talent. And given we as a whole society even constrained by that, the Smes are even more. I mean, I think some of the things also we mentioned in our research is around, there are sort of industry bodies around subsectors that have come together to try to sort this out. We have seen, you know, across the region in Scandinavia, we've seen examples of public procurement, how they have used sort of that as a vehicle also to help the Smes and sort of in order to what can you say, stimulate the demand on it. So I think there are sort of pockets of examples, but not at a scale yet where I think it's what we're pointing to that is needed.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Jens, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Absolutely.
So you can see the other panelists as well. Yes. Nathanael, you had a question for Jens as well?
I have many. Thank you, Julie. The first thing is, yeah, just to mention that Belgium has jumped 7 ranks in 2020 in the Global AI Index. So I hope there will be a new study and a regular update of that, because in 2019 and 2020, there have been many announcements and many refining of the strategy. So in 2020, we were 12th on the global index for the governmental strategy. But I have 3 questions. The first one is, how do you see the importance of the technology transfer and what can we improve in the Benelux. Have you studied the brain drain, and what would be the factors, the key factors for retaining the brains or attract them within the Benelux? And the third one is about the investment in capital investment. So I used to be advisor for the French government on AI, and we identified that there were some Series C investment lacking. What do you think about Benelux?
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot for those. I think they're very good. Just a clarification on the first one on tech transfer. Do you see it in terms of university, private sector collaboration? Is that or?
Yes, exactly, because I think AI is very specific on this aspect. So we have really good researchers that have been hired in the big companies, and technology and science are going so fast that the technology transfer, I think, is very much shorter than for other scientific domain or so yeah, I'm talking about this. So the valorization of the research results, and maybe is it a new process for AI?
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Let me start on that aspect, and I think my answer may be a sort of a bit more general for the DF9 region, and then maybe we can together try to sort of interpret in terms of the Benelux what that exactly means. I mean, I think on an overall level, I think you're spot on. There is I think we're observing some factors around this that we have not seen before. And I mean, I think if you go to the hallways of the computer science department, although AI is not only computer science, but as an illustration on Carnegie Mellon University, on University of Berkeley, you will see many doors where there's no people sitting in there, and it's not due to COVID. It's simply because that for some of the leading universities, half of the staff have been employed on a so-called temporary basis by the leading technology companies, right? So there has been and you can say in many ways, well, then that's good for tech transfer, because then you sort of get a collaboration on it, but it has almost, the pendulum has swung so much in versus what we have seen before. And I think there is a great opportunity here for working together between the academic world and the private sector, because the private sector, if you also look at number of patents taken, I mean, some of the leading academic papers and patents are taken by private businesses because you have so much of the talent here. So I think the whole notion of around how do you actually make sort of that tech transfer work and collaborate together, I think is a big topic, and it might also be, I think a topic to consider when we as societies want to, build up these capabilities of our private sector, that we think about how can we use our universities for that. And that a little bit also goes to your second question around brain drain, because there is, as I think some of our research shows, it is so concentrated. And just look at the top patent developers on AI globally. You will see, 10 very familiar US and some Chinese company names, and they are attracting sort of massively the best talent from around the world. And I think the only way we can do that in Europe, in DF9 and the Benelux, is to invest behind, so we have attractive positions for our talent in Europe. And I think one of the things that we need to play on is that we need to play on some of the strongholds we have as societies of the sectors we have. So if climate and sustainability is a big topic that we're anyways driving in this region, well, that area also holds enormous potential for AI. And how we marry these disciplines together, so we use AI as a way to solve some of the other challenges, I think that will also drive hugely exciting jobs and reasons for people staying in our region. So I think we need also to offer something different than the pure things coming out of the US, because that is hard to compete against. On your last question around investment capital, I think, I mean, both when and some of the stats I showed earlier, I think also points to this. I mean, overall, as a European level, we're lacking significantly behind the US and China, and also the DF9, including the Benelux, is coming behind some of the leaders on this in Europe. So it is definitely one of the areas that is needed, because although that this is software, there are actually quite significant investments in terms of having the infrastructure to run these algorithms and to build up, you know, the data sets in order to do this. So.
Thank you.
All right, interesting discussion. I know that Max also has some questions, but I'm going to ask you to ask only one, Max, so that we have some time for the audience, their questions as well.
Yes, sure, Julie. No problem there. Jens, you mentioned the potential in the Benelux for climate change based AI. And that's a specific topic, then a niche, maybe specialization. And I was wondering if I'm looking back at the last 2 years, there were a lot of pure players developing that really focus on AI and that build a company, a startup out of a specific specialization. But with this pure player profile, this very specialized niche-based development, who is actually more successful in the Benelux at the moment? Is it the pure players, the small teams that focus on something like Earth observation, water management, stuff like this, or is it more the integrators, the larger teams that focus on a lot of different topics and help SMEs, for example, to integrate already existing solutions? Maybe you have an idea on that.
And I think thanks for the question, because I think it brings back what I mentioned on sustainability and climate, which is just that is one example on it, because I think you're onto something which is more, it's probably more than the niche versus what I would say sort of the integrators. My point, I think, is if we think of us as a region, I think the probability, I'm not saying it cannot happen, the probability that we will develop, you know, the 5 next big tech companies, I deem is very low. I mean, Google, Amazon, Facebook, many of the Chinese ones coming out, Ping An, etc., are just far ahead on that. I think where we have a chance to be successful is in the vertical focus. And I can sort of use an example for which I think illustrates it well. There is it's a Danish example, so apologies for that. There is a small company, and what they're doing now is that they have developed a algorithm which can listen into when you call 911, and it can much better than a human being detect by listening to the voice whether a person has a heart attack or not. And why do I use that example? Well, you could say, why is it that Google or Amazon or some of the others, you know, they have fantastic speech recognition algorithms? You know, why don't they just capture that vertical? Well, it's because understanding whether a person has a heart attack and taking that whole contextual environment when a person is in panic, you know, the voice is sort of different, and sort of understanding that, you know, they've just proven that they're 10 times better than the general tech platforms. And I think that serves as an example for how we can win. We can win on sectors where we already have an understanding of it. We have proprietary data, we have capabilities. And if we then marry that with investments in AI, then in those verticals, we, you know, as a region, given our previous strongholds, can compete against the big tech giants. And I think that is the important thing to think about, how we as a region will, you know, will win in the age of AI. It's not developing the 5 big Amazons.
All right, great. Thank you, Jens. We have time for one question of the audience. Thanks to the panel members already for their questions. And I'm going to take the one from Casper Hoppe, who is asking which industries or sectors have jumped out as the main potential AI growers in the Benelux when you studied the use cases?
Yeah, so maybe a sort of a couple of observations on it. I think the first observation we did when we did the research is that we looked at what was the penetration across sectors of the sort of the first digital technology wave. So that would be, first waves of web technology, database technology, etc. And then we looked at who are the sectors, or what are the sectors that are adopting AI at the moment. And we saw a very strong correlation of that. So the sectors, which was, not surprisingly, but the telco, banking, financial sectors, they were some of the leaders on the first wave, and they've also been some of the leaders on the second wave. The second thing we observed is what is a bit different here is when we look going forward is because AI is a much more general purpose technology that essentially, and when we study the use cases that go into all parts of the business, so it's everything from back office optimization, it's to developing new products for customers, it's to around making your operations more efficient, etc. The picture going forward is actually some of the sectors that have had less adoption so far, including the retail sector, it can be the transportation sector. They actually hold a relatively big potential going forward. So as a whole, actually, it's actually the likes of retail and transport and logistics for the Benelux as a whole that on a nominal basis come out as some of the ones on top.
Great. Thank you so much for the insights, Jens, and for the answers. It's definitely already an interesting discussion, and it sets the scene for the breakout sessions. In terms of practicalities, so for the breakout sessions, you will move to a different room. And in these sessions, you can again ask questions to the panelists via the chat. Between the two breakout rounds, there will be a short break. And after the second session, you can come back to the plenary here for the wrap-up of the event and a closing keynote. So the first breakout sessions are AI for government and AI ethics. So to go to the respective breakout rooms, you can click on the button in the lower left corner of the screen. I invite you all to join your breakout rooms now, and I will see you later again in this plenary session. Welcome back. I hope you had an interesting discussion in your sessions. I know I did, so thank you for that. I'm now going to ask the moderators of the 4 breakout sessions to shortly present the conclusions and recommendations. Let's start with AI for government. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The AI for government session was a very insightful session with a lot of different participants, use cases being shared, some of the challenges of AI in government, but also a lot of the potential. And in the end, we decided to take a look at where the Benelux can have an additional value, so more ways forward. And there were a number of very interesting suggestions made. So the first one was that the Benelux can help with the language databases. So Dutch in particular is overlooked by many of the USA-based solutions. So helping to get bundling expertise together can help AI Dutch AI language support, but also definitely there's a lot of insightful initiatives in the different countries, but we should emphasize on reusing and not reinventing the wheel by opening up data, software, expertise, collaborating together, and especially in police experiments, we should try to see and be a leading example within the EU, on the EU level, to see like a more in-depth collaboration on data, and pilots and experiments to learn and be a shining beacon, so to speak, on the European level. And in that sense, scaling up workable solutions across the Benelux is, for government agencies, is really a lot of potential where the Benelux can have great additional benefits. So it was very interesting, a lot of great questions, and yeah, perfect for the future. That's for sure. There's a lot more to work on.
Great, thank you, Colin. Next up is the breakout on AI ethics and human-centric AI. Peter, please take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Well, our session as well was very lively. A lot of interesting points were brought up. We talked a lot about the increasing need for interdisciplinarity. This is, of course, not new, but it is almost becoming a discipline of its own. And it is essential for human-centric AI to achieve this. And also to move further down, in the idea of the quadruple helix and how it is important to involve all stakeholders through the whole development process of AI applications. And we saw some nice examples of this in our session, for instance, the Musketeer project in Leuven, but also the public consultation being done in Luxembourg to shape their AI policy, the ELSA labs that are used in Netherlands to explore wicked problems, or the AI Experience Center in Brussels, where this quadruple helix is really put into practice. And we also had some discussion on how ethical AI is more than just human-centric AI. We need to take this idea broader and not just have this user-centered perspective, but look at how to move towards AI for a common good and take this broader perspective, taking into account all societal aspects of AI, taking into account climate change and so on. And of course, we also had a look at potential cross-border collaboration within the Benelux or even broader. And well, we as well, as Colin also mentioned, came to the conclusion that we need to capitalize on existing initiatives, but also on our common expertise as policymakers. The Hague, Brussels, Luxembourg City, these are all policy capitals. We need to use that experience we have there and capitalize on existing initiatives such as the European Digital Innovation Hubs, the CLARE Network, the ELSA Labs. So not reinvent the wheel here as well. And of course, the Benelux itself is also an instrument to coordinate our AI policies. And as a concluding thought, we came to the conclusion that as Benelux AI policy, the AI coalitions are actually leaders with regard to this idea of AI for the common good, and this is really something that we should turn into a competitive advantages for our nations.
Great, thank you, Peter. Great conclusions. We're first going to talk about future of work. So Jeroen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Julie. We had, in fact, a good debate with a really wide range of insights, but in the end, we agreed on 3 or 4 conclusions. For the future of work and for our labor markets, it's important to know that AI and digitization will offer more opportunities compared to the threats. In a digitizing world, there will be more jobs created than threatened. That's the first aspect. Second aspect, AI is not only about specialists, about data, about algorithms. It's also about business. It's also about solving societal problems in which nearly everyone, at least a lot of people, should be involved. Third point, Europe will work on a platform with access to trainings and educational material linked to the AI topic as soon as possible. And the last one, the Benelux could and should be an agile partnership to communicate with one voice towards our populations, but also to prove that AI projects could have big societal impact and provide solutions for our populations.
All right. Thank you, Jeroen. Let's now move to the conclusions of the data governance breakout session. Benjamin, go ahead.
We started discussing the Federated Data Sharing Initiative, as it has been mentioned as an alternative to the existing data sharing models that operate mainly on a winner-takes-all mentality. In this context, the need for common ground on standards for data sharing was underlined. The panel acknowledged that there is still room for improvement for cooperation at the Benelux level when it comes to the Federating Data Sharing Initiative. As a possible way forward, we thought it might be interesting to identify opportunities for cross-border data sharing among Benelux countries, but left the question what governing body or platform would be most appropriate to do so unanswered. The panel also discussed more broadly the challenges of cross-border data sharing. We noticed that the starting point should always be a collaboration on specific use cases. In the same vein, the experience gained from collaboration of specific use cases should be used as best practice models and feed into the more general discussion around a European framework for data governance. Finally, we also briefly touched upon the role of regulators and the need for further and stronger guidance on the one hand, and the necessity to move forward with concrete projects in the absence of such guidance. In this context, also the question of cooperation between regulators at Benelux level arose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benjamin, for those recommendations. All of the ideas discussed in the breakout sessions today will be further discussed by the Telecom and AI work group of the Benelux. And there will also be a report which will be shared, and all of the ideas and summaries of what we will discuss today will be in there. These results will also be shared with the other regional AI collaborations from the D9, like for instance, the Baltics and the Nordics, to see if collaboration there is also possible. Now, we are coming to the final part of the event. So I'd like to introduce Cécile Ruet, Deputy Head of Unit Robotics and AI at DG Connect, the European Commission, for the closing keynote. Cécile, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Bonjour, goeiedag, and moyen. So I'm very glad to and thank you for the invitation, and the feedback was already very interesting from what I just heard. I'll try to make the quick link to our activities in the Commission. You know, we have a coordinated plan on AI where we talk frequently to the member states, and we work together. We inform them about our action to support the member states, but we also encourage member states to cooperate among themselves and also to develop their own national strategy, but in a coherent way. We want to have a European AI without frontier, and so that we have also the single market for AI. And what is very important at the core of our activities is really the AI made in Europe, which respects our values. So what you were saying about ethics and about environment, this is at the core of our activities, of course. And our AI strategy is a comprehensive one. It includes both research and development, so funding support for that, and deployment as well, but also addressing the socio-economic aspects. So when you were talking about jobs and skills, this is one of the pillars of our action. We want to support the member states and work with you on those aspects to make sure that people are equipped with the right skills to use AI, and also the developers of AI, we need them in Europe as well. And finally, the third pillar is about ethical issue and regulatory aspect, and you know that very soon in April we are going to publish the regulatory framework for AI. In parallel, so we have the white paper on AI where we are going to develop the ecosystem of excellence and the ecosystem of trust. So the ecosystem of trust is the regulatory framework, and the ecosystem of excellence is about the funding. And here I would like to mention some of the instruments that we have, and you can capitalize on that and further develop them in your country. In particular, you can also think about using this RRF facility, so the recovery fund that has to be to dedicate 20% on digital. So this is an excellent opportunity to reinforce your strengths on AI, and having a Benelux approach could be a nice way as well. So we are funding networks of excellent centers to bring the best research teams to work together and progress faster on research and development. We have the AI on demand platform, which is a central access point to all the AI resource and we have in Europe. So it's a central access point where the provider, the developers of the technology can put their resource there and to provide them to users. So we'll also develop a marketplace, and it can also be used for researchers to experiment as well. Finally, we will have the testing and experimentation facilities. There we want in the digital program that is upcoming to develop real sites where people, developer of AI, can test in real condition their prototypes, their products. And we will do that in healthcare, in manufacturing, in smart city, smart community, and agriculture. So your country, again, can benefit from that. And you can also develop your own testing facilities in Benelux. So I think, and you mentioned already Digital Innovation Hub, so I don't need to repeat that. We will also have a program of Adopt AI. It is for public sectors. So your session regarding government is very relevant to that. And what I really like what you said is your experience as Benelux cooperation can really serve as a shining beacon, and you can bring your experience in the group we have on the coordinated plan on AI to explain to other countries what works cross-border. For instance, regarding regulatory sandboxes, we will have them also in the testing facility to understand the regulatory framework of testing and deploying the technology. But if you together, the three of you, have faster way of developing regulation, you can bring that as example to help the other also to grow that, scale that up at EU level. So I see Benelux as a mini Europe, which can show the way, lead the way for the rest of Europe to really move faster in AI and in joining effort in bringing our complementarities together so that we can really have a European AI, which is really the one we want under our conditions and our value, and not being imposed an AI coming from out there without necessarily following our rules. So thank you again, and it was very insightful for me to listen to your feedback.
Thank you, Cécile. What a great and inspiring message to end. And thank you for this overview of what we're doing at a European level in terms of AI and what we can leverage nationally and also with the Benelux together. So with this, we are coming at the end of the event. And I'd like to thank the Benelux, the NL AI Coalition, Digital Luxembourg, and AI for Belgium for setting it up. Also, a big thank you to all the speakers and panelists, and a special shout out to Lotte Dekink for being the driving force behind the event. Finally, thank you all for joining us here today and for your active participation in the breakout sessions. We hope that you learned a lot from each other, exchanged the best practices, and that we'll collaborate further in the future. I wish you all a great afternoon.